So in this video, we're going to introduce the idea of plants, which is our next chapter. We're going to have a test over this chapter as well. Here in about 2 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, depending on how long it takes us to get through this. Chapter 3, Lesson 1 is an introduction, and should be a lot of review for things that you should have learned in previous years. But we're going to go through it. We'll go through it quickly. On the sections where you have to write down the notes in your book, please pause the video. There's one image where you have to draw on, so please pause the video and then restart when you're finished and ready to move on. You'll have your assignment today and it'll be due tomorrow. Should be pretty easy and pretty quick. So when we look at plants, then we have to start with the idea of the basic plant. The most basic plant, I'm sure many of you have seen, if not all of you have seen. If you walked around in fresh water or even some salt water, you've gotten this on your feet in low-lying areas. It's called green algae. Now in green algae, I don't see leaves, I don't see flowers, I don't see root systems, I don't see stems, but the cells are still the same cells that I find in a tree or grass or flowers. So green algae is my very basic first introductory of what plants are. When I look at plants then, one of the classifications is they have to be green in some way, shape, or form because they're going to have chloroplasts and chlorophyll. Chloroplasts are these little pocket areas. The chlorophyll is the green substance on the inside. And as we talked, that green substance is what's going to be used in photosynthesis. It's going to absorb what? So hopefully you thought the sun's light, because those are autotrophs. And autotrophs, once again, create their own energy. When we get a little further in our book and in the next book, they're going to also refer to them as producers, meaning the same thing. An autotroph is a producer. It produces its own food. The beginning of any food web and food chain, though, is the sun that then gives its energy to the autotroph, or the producer, which then is going to go through photosynthesis. What photosynthesis looks like is it has to have sunlight to begin. But then it has to have a couple other things, and it's going to give off a couple of things. So once I have the sunlight in the chloroplast, the chlorophyll inside of the plant, then I have to have carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide comes from all animals. Animals have to have oxygen in order to breathe, but they exhale carbon dioxide. So that means without animals, plants are not going to exist. But inside the leaves, and that's the only place that photosynthesis happens, I have my chlorophyll, I have my sunlight, I have my carbon dioxide. I need one more thing. I have to have water. Water then is taken in through the transpiration system, the vascular tubes, up through the roots to the stem to the leaves. Once again, photosynthesis does not happen in the flower, it does not happen in the stem, it does not happen in the roots. It only happens in the leaf of the plant. What it gives off then is it creates sugar in photosynthesis. So that's its glucose. But then it exhales, kind of like you and I exhale. It exhales through the bottom of the leaves, and it gives off oxygen. Without oxygen, you and I can't exist. So there's a cycle there where plants are dependent on animals, but animals are just as dependent on plants. Without one or the other, it's going to be a dead planet. We have to have plants for animals to live. We have to have animals for plants to live. When I look at how the organisms are set up, I mentioned this a little bit ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. Tissue, it's a group of cells that work together. So when we get into health, we'll talk more about this. But we talked about how cells are designed for specific jobs. And all of those cells come together to make up a tissue. And when those tissues are all together forming a specific thing, they make an organ. An organ is a part of an organ system, and all organ systems make up an organism. Plants are the exact same way as the animals. They have cells, and cells have specific jobs. A leaf cell is not the same as a stem cell, which is not the same as a root cell. So those cells come together to make up the tissue. Cells working together for a particular job. Those tissues make up an organ, like the leaf. The leaf is then part of the organism. So all organs would come together to make the organism. When I focus specifically on the cells then, I know that there are a few things that are different in the plant cell compared to the animal cell. So in the animal cell, we know that we have a nucleus, and we'll talk about that last. But some of the things that I don't have chloroplasts, do I? I'm not green, I'm not an autotroph, I don't create my own food. But I also don't have a vacuole. I have small vacuoles, but they don't do the same job as vacuoles on plants. This vacuole's main job is to hold water and give it structure. It'll hold a couple other things. It will also hold some food for later use, and it'll have some waste coming off from those cells as they use their energy until it can get pushed out of the cell through these little openings in the cell wall. So it'll hold a couple other things, but its main job is to hold water. I also don't have a cell wall. The cell wall gives my cell structure. It keeps the cell protected from the outside environment, but it also keeps its structure. So if you notice, when this water vacuole is filled up, and I set my cell wall has structure and pressure on it, then the plant's going to stand nice and straight. Its stem is going to be erect so that it can get as much sunlight as possible. When I start going through a drought or someone forgets to put water on my plants, then this water gets used up inside the plant, and then those cell walls begin to collapse. And as they collapse, the plant begins to wilt. It can't keep its structure. It can't stay rigid. I give it water, or it rains, it fills back up, it becomes rigid again, and it's reaching for the sun. Once again, the other thing that I don't have is the chloroplasts, these green pockets all the way around and throughout the cell, because I have to have the chloroplasts to absorb the sun's light in order to create the energy through photosynthesis. The nucleus, it's not in the center of the cell like on animal cells, because this giant water vacuole pushes it out to the side. But when I look at how this nucleus is made up and what it does, it works exactly like yours and mine does. There's DNA inside of that nucleus, deoxyribose nucleic acid, that tells the cell what to do, how to work, and how to keep that organism alive. That's what our nucleuses do, nuclei do. It tells our cells what to do and how to keep us alive. So the first set of questions on number 1, almost all plants do what? They're good for their food. Well, they make their own food because once again they are an autotroph. What is the function of the cell wall for the plant? Well, it gives it structure and it protects it from its environment. It keeps it rigid. And the third one, well, what would happen to a plant if it's given too much water? It's kind of like a water balloon. If I fill up a water balloon and it has a small hole, as I fill it up, it's going to continue to squirt water out. A cell's vacuole does the same thing. If there's too much water in it, it just pushes it out. We have this process called transpiration, which is when water and water vapor leaves a plant through the bottom of its leaves. It happens over a slow period of time, so we don't notice it. We don't see trees dripping with water unless it has rain. But water transpiration happens all the time in leaves throughout our growth season. So pause the video and make sure your book is filled out, and then unpause it and we'll continue together. So then the next thing we talk about on page 88 is how plants are going to be able to survive. So green algae, their job is easy. They're in water, and that's what they have to have. Their chloroplasts is inside of them, and they're sitting on top of the water exposed to the sunlight. So their job's pretty easy. But the other plants, not so easy. They have to have the leaves where the photosynthesis is going to take place, but they have to get as close to the sun as they can. So they have to have this stem system that's going on. But not just that, they have to get water. And water isn't absorbed through my leaves. Water is going to be absorbed through my root system. So I have to have a root system to absorb water, to send it up to the leaves, to create the food, and then the food has to be sent throughout all of the plant to keep the entire plant healthy. So when we talk about that, absorption of water, then this page talks about 2 different types of organisms. The Saguaro Cactus, which we find out west in the United States. If you ever go to Arizona, they're amazing to just look at. They're absolutely gigantic in some areas. Some of them are a couple hundred years old. But their root system is very different than our trees around here. Their root systems are very shallow and they spread out. Since it's a desert, we know there's only a little less than 2 inches of rain every single year. So when it does rain, those roots have to absorb as much water as possible. Since the ground is so dry, there's not enough time for water to drip through it. It evaporates. So they are laying right underneath the surface of the sand, and then when it starts to rain, they begin to suck it up. If you ever watch a time-lapse video of Saguaro Cactus from the dry season to the rainy season, they become very shrunken in and smaller. It's like an accordion that goes in and out, in and out, in and out. They're going in, and the drier it gets, the further they go in. When it rains, all of these roots, shallow roots, begin to absorb as much water as possible, and then all of a sudden it expands. And you can actually watch time-lapse videos where Saguaro Cactus shrink and expand, shrink and expand. It's kind of like a camel that holds water in its hump. These hold water inside of their trunks, inside of their cells, and so they can survive during the dry season. The acacia tree is just the opposite though. It doesn't have shallow roots because it has these grasses and shrubs that are going to absorb all the shallow water. So they have to dig deep root systems. They have what's called a tap root. And it goes really deep inside the ground, almost as tall as the tree is itself. And then it has a couple of little teeny tiny root systems that come off of it. So in your book, you need to draw this image, showing a deep tap root with a couple of little roots coming off of the side. Pause the video and get that filled in, and then we'll continue together. So transpiration then. Transpiration, this is a cross-section of celery. And I'm sure all of you have noticed in life, these little itty-bitty, teeny-tiny strands inside of celery. I've heard them called the celery strings. Well, what those actually are, those are the transportation systems. Those are the vascular tissue of the celery. They work just like the veins and arteries do inside of our body. Veins and arteries carry vitamins, nutrients, water, oxygen, so on and so forth throughout our body from beginning to end. Well, these are going to carry the oxygen, they're going to, or not the oxygen, the carbon dioxide, the glucose, the water throughout the system. There are two different pieces inside of those little itty-bitty strings, even though we can't see them. But hopefully you remember from 4th grade the terminology of phloem and xylem. But I'm going to review that with you just in case you don't. Phloem and xylem have two jobs. They, one, either carry food, or two, they carry water. And there's really an easy trick to remember how they work. So when I talk about phloem, it starts with pH, but it has the F sound. Well, so does the word food. So the glucose that's being carried from the leaves after photosynthesis throughout the plant is going to be carried in the phloem. The food is carried by the phloem, and it leaves the leaf where photosynthesis happens and goes throughout the body of the plant. The xylem, well, when I look at xylem, it has X, Y, just kind of like the order of the alphabet. Well, the order of the alphabet, we have W, X, Y. Well, that should help us remember which one xylem is, because W comes with the X, Y. Water starts with a W. Water is carried from the roots in the xylem up the stem into the leaves where photosynthesis can happen. Photosynthesis will not happen without water. So xylem carries it up through the roots, through the stem into the leaf. Photosynthesis takes place. The food is created, and that food leaves through the phloem and is carried throughout the organism so it can stay healthy and strong. Another aspect of water then, when I think about the importance of water, I have to be able to keep it in my leaf. If the water leaves my leaf quickly, then I can't have photosynthesis happening. So I have this waxy top to a leaf, and if you look at any leaf on any of our deciduous trees, when they're actually out there right now, they've fallen off. But you'll notice there's a shiny side and a dull side. The shiny side is what's called the cuticle. The cuticle is this waxy substance right here that's really thick. Well, that wax doesn't mix with water. There isn't a wax that does mix with water. So it keeps water from passing through the top of the leaf. The leaf is always turned up because it also is thick with chlorophyll at the top of it so that it can absorb more sunlight and more photosynthesis can happen. At the bottom then, this is where I have some openings, and we'll talk about those a little later in our book, where oxygen leaves, carbon dioxide comes in, water can also leave. We don't want a whole bunch of it leaving to the top where it gets hot. We want this to be something that can withstand the heat and absorb the sun's heat so photosynthesis can take place and food can be created. So that cuticle protects your leaf. And that's going to be talking about our first answer. What is a cuticle? Well, a cuticle is a waxy layer at the top of a leaf that keeps the plant from losing the water. Water is vital to a plant's life. Can't have photosynthesis, so it can't have food without it. The second one, we'll talk about the pros and the cons for tall plants. Well, the negative is that they have to be able to be strong enough to stand up and dig their roots deep into the ground. But the good thing, the pro, is that the taller they are, they can be above all other competing organisms and get more sunlight. So the taller the trees are, especially if they're pushed closer together, then they're the ones that are going to get the sunlight. And if I got a canopy of trees that's really tall, and I got little itty bitty plants on the ground trying to grow, they're not going to get the sunlight, and they're not going to be healthy plants at all, even if they're able to survive. So that was quick, but pause the video and write it down, and then when you're done, then you can get your assignment. I'll put it back on that slide, so you can, when you're finished with the video, then you can turn it off. But make sure you have your notes taken, then get your homework, and it's due tomorrow.